Since last year, Congressman Peter Visclosky has been on the campaign trail rallying for funds to expand the South Shore to Dyer. 16 communities in Lake County have pledged a portion of their new income tax money over the next 30 years to help make that happen, though not everyone has signed on. To find out where we are, we have Congressman Visclosky. Welcome.
Steve, thank you very much. Good to be on the program.
So 16 communities have signed on to this. The county signed on to this, but Cedar Lake is saying no. Griffith is saying no. And then most notably, Hammond has said that they're not interested, at least right now. In fact, Mayor McDermott is calling for a referendum at this point on the whole project. Does missing the $900,000 that would come from Hammond, does that really put a real kink in this project?
Steve, at this point, the project is going to proceed. And from my perspective, because Hammond originally also did not agree for the 30-year bond issue commitment, that the value of the project is going to be seen. And I think everyone will come along. The fact is, for the actual commitment for a 30-year bond issue, we now have 10 of the 20 communities, including Lake County, who have reaffirmed their support. And I believe that will, again, continue to approach the 15 or 16 community level. I think that will show a consensus that will be very helpful in the spring with the Indiana General Assembly.
Well, speaking of that consensus, what about Mayor McDermott's notion that we need a referendum? We need to show this money is going to be committed for 30 years, local tax money. We need a referendum before we go forward to show that the people in this county want this project.
Steve, referendums for schools, for example, are authorized under state law for new taxes. I emphasize that there is no new tax money involved. There's an existing local source of revenue that has been collected for over the last year. This is a decision on how to allocate those monies by public officials. And this has been a project that's been worked on for 27 years. We had 12 communities in Lake County, including Lake County and Porter County, commit funds to a study in 2004. Would point out that there's legislation in the General Assembly that created the Regional Development Authority in 2005 that expressly said one of the 4 charges is to expand South Shore service.
Though we still don't know some basic things like where the stations are going to go, and there's an environmental impact study that's just really getting underway. There'll be a public hearing, I think, right at the end of this month. Do we really know enough about this project to commit that kind of money now, as opposed to after we see the results of that study?
First of all, if we did not have a commitment of the monies, we couldn't proceed with the study. And the point of the study is to begin to make sure you have additional public input in this as far as where are stations going to be located and how are we going to maximize the economic development through transit-oriented development in Northwest Indiana. That study has to be completed for that federal application to be filed. That application also cannot be filed absent a commitment as far as non-federal funding. So it is key to this process.
Okay, so that's kind of where we are in the process. But what about Hammond is saying no. East Chicago, I don't think they've made a commitment at this point. I don't think it's any coincidence. They also already have South Shore stations there. What's the argument you make to communities that already have stations? How are they benefiting? Or, for that matter, communities that aren't along the line, places like Hobart in the far south, in the southern parts of the county?
It's a great question. I would use Hobart as an example. At this point, Hobart has made a commitment. The community of New Chicago has made a commitment. Lake Station has made a commitment. You couldn't get farther away from a line Hammond to Dyer, but they understand if someone goes to work in Lake County, if we grow the economy in Northwest Indiana, and if you would, people are paying that tax, their communities also benefit. God forbid you could work someplace else besides Hobart in Lake County. As far as the existing line, there is huge potential advantage to them if we proceed. This is not just the expansion. Gary is a prime example. Michigan City has decided they want to make a change as far as how the train goes down 11th Street. That will take over $100 million investment. People in South Bend want to cut 12 minutes off that ride. The point I make is, as we proceed with the legislature in the spring, what we're asking for is their cooperation to give us some additional tools to invest in the existing line and the expansion to grow the economy. Those tools are not just there for the expansion, but also will be very helpful to the communities along the existing line.
And obviously, this is a big project. It costs a lot of money to extend a train line, so it's never a small idea, no matter how you slice it. But do you think that this project is comprehensive enough? Since you were talking about one train line down to Dyer, I remember a couple of years ago being up at the Dan Rabin Transit Plaza in Hammond, watching bus service end in Hammond, and you think like, wow, nobody really came to rally to save bus service, regional bus service. Why should those communities step up now and fund a train? Because
you have to start somewhere. Ultimately, the line is to go to Valparaiso as well as the community of Lowell. You can't get to Lowell from Hammond without going through Munster and Dyer and Cherville and St. John. You can't get to Valpo without going through Gary and Lake Station and Hobart, for example. You have to start somewhere, and I'm also convinced, it's like the Lakeshore. Portage spent 7 years opening up a dump site to now have 63 acres open on the lake. You now see that happening in Whiting. And once people see that advantage and the economic growth along those lines, there's going to be an impulse to let's just hit the gas. Why didn't we immediately go to Valpo and Lowell right away?
You've been in Congress 30 years. You've been working at this for most of that career. Why is this so important to you?
It's important to me because ultimately I am a resident lifelong of Lake County, Indiana. This is my home. I grew up in a household where you're supposed to leave the world better. Since 1970, Lake County's lost 9.6% of its population. We've gotten 43% older. Our median income is down. Lake County lost people last year. And I think it's because of lack of public investment. This is a project with a 30-year bond issue that will be here benefiting the citizens of Northwest Indiana 100 years from now. We're the last undeveloped suburb of Chicago. You will just draw and bleed that entire economy down to Northwest Indiana and create great new jobs and investment opportunity.
I want to switch gears here because I have a congressman in here. I wanted to ask you about the VA. We obviously very high-profile resignations over the last couple of weeks here. Do you feel that they are addressing the issues of the backlogs and the lack of care that we've seen in cases all around the country?
Steve, the VA has a long way to go. There are huge systemic problems. The good news is everyone's attention is focused on this problem. As slothful as Congress has been on occasion, reauthorizing highway bills, we did enact legislation to push the VA along. One that's critically important to Northwest Indiana is if you are more than 40 miles away from a major treatment center, think of the Brown Center in the city of Chicago, we ought to provide you with other alternative services so you can get them and get them quickly. Our office has been very active with the Veterans Administration now in the interpretation of that legislation because, as you know, volunteers have to now pick up veterans, some of whom are very ill, from wherever they may live in Northwest Indiana to take them to Crown Point, then get on a bus, go to Chicago, spend a day, get on a bus, go back. And my point to the administration is that's more than 40 miles. We have to have some additional relief and options for veterans in places like Northwest Indiana as well.
And I could point to cases where veterans they get all the way up to Chicago and they have to catch a bus without actually seeing a doctor because of the length of time. So what's the solution there? Does Adam Benjamin need to become more of a full-service treatment center? Does it have to be more independent from Hines and Jesse Brown?
I wouldn't say that that's the first solution. The first solution is literally coming on from the top and to create a sense of urgency for every employee at the VA to begin to address the systemic problems that slows this entire process down, that then also essentially encourages people to think outside the box and how are we going to deal with that veteran's problem as efficiently and as completely as possible. Maybe it's not taking them to Benjamin Clinic. Maybe it's not taking them to Jesse Brown. Maybe it's a physician in their own community. So I wouldn't suggest that there's any radical change that needs to be made at the Benjamin Clinic now. It's the system that has to be unstuck first.
Though, of course, that could be a major change in and of itself if they didn't have to go to a VA facility. But that really is going to be a conversation for another day because that's an entirely new topic.
Delighted to have it.
All right. In the meantime, Congressman Peter Visclosky, thank you so much for coming on.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve.